Here's a pro tip. Figuring out this retirement, it never ends. Okay, you build your bucket system. Guess what? 6 months down the road, a year down the road, you gotta do it again. A year from now, your spending is going to be different. When does this end? Well, it doesn't. So we're going to have to figure out, how do you keep refilling those buckets and doing it over and over and over again. We're going to talk about that today on the Retirement Answerman Show. Welcome. My name is Roger Whitney. I am your host. If you are new here, this entire month of February, we are talking about how to live life without a paycheck in retirement. And this is the show dedicated to helping you not just survive retirement, we want you to rock retirement. So I was having a conversation, what was it, 2 weeks ago with a client, a newer client, and we were talking about how this all works. Between front-loading experiential spending and still being okay later on in life. And I was struggling for an analogy or a metaphor, which I do a lot. I abuse them. And I wanted to give them a mental picture of what this exercise of managing life in retirement looks like. And sort of demonstrate that, hey, you're never really going to have this figured out. And so it made me think of a video I saw with a jet landing on an aircraft carrier. So this is the story or the metaphor I used with them. I'm like, so we're the jet. We are call sign Rock Retirement, and we want to land on the USS Retirement. And we're trying to land the plane, and landing is the rest of our life. But the winds are really strong. So the plane, us, are getting pushed back and forth, up and down, side to side, based on the winds of change of how our life unfolds and the things that we care about. So it's hard to stay oriented on getting home to aircraft safely. Not only that, the waters are not smooth. So the boat, the aircraft carrier, is moving side to side. It's moving forward and backward. So it's a moving target because we don't know how long our life is going to be. So that's constantly being estimated based on health and other things. So you got that going on. You got the plane moving all around in terms of what it wants to do. It wants to get home safely, but it wants to have a good ride today. That's a lot of change that's happening in a very fluid way. And not only that, on the horizon, you can see potential for major storms to come in, but you're not sure whether those storms are going to come in or not, but you can see them. You can see them out there, which that could change the whole dynamic of how you get home safely to your aircraft carrier, metaphorically speaking. You know, those could be sequence of returns. They could be major health issues. Constantly, you're having to reorient and adjust to the new conditions, not only on how long you're going to live, but what you want to spend and the storms on the horizon. That's sort of what the exercise is of managing life in retirement and trying to make the best of the only life you have. Make sure you have enough money when you're close to the end of the approach, but also to make sure you have enough life and you don't die with too much money. It's all about change management. I don't know if that it works for me, and I think it communicated to the client, but when we're talking about having a paycheck without work, it's sort of this exercise. That's one reason why I created Agile Retirement Management, because you better be agile. You better not put it on autopilot and go to sleep, because you might end up in the ocean. So we're going to talk about how do you do some of this management of the bucket system and how do you set yourself up for success on today's show, but we can't do any of that until we have that all-important disclaimer. Life is about change, and the way you manage change is having people by your side, whether it's your tax advisor, your financial advisor, or your legal advisor, to help you manage through that change because they know enough about you to be able to do that. And guess what? I am not that person. I don't know anything about you. So don't take advice from me. Think of this as helpful hints in education, hopefully some wisdom that I picked up along the way, and make sure you talk to those people before you do anything. That's common sense. Now, in our hot topic segment, I want to talk about how to set yourself up for success in managing all this change when you're using an advisor. So I grew up thinking a doctor knew everything. If the doctor said you should do something, or that you needed something, or they said you had this particular ailment, that they must know what they're talking about, and so I'm going to do whatever they say. Only through being alive for so long and having to interact with doctors when it came to when my mom was sick with cancer, with issues my wife has had, issues that I've had, you start to appreciate as you get older how little doctors really know. In that really what they are is they're like a detective. They're taking blood work, they're tapping on certain areas, they're looking at x-rays and everything else, and they're trying to identify, and they go through a laundry list of what it possibly could be. And then they just keep checking things off until hopefully they stumble across what it actually is. But they're not infallible, and they are really, really good, well-educated guessers, more than black and white, this is what it is, do this. But when you're a layman, like me, when it comes to medical issues, they're using words I can't even pronounce, and I definitely can't spell. And so it's very easy to abdicate responsibility for your healthcare decisions to your doctors because they obviously are much smarter about this than you. And if they say this is what it is, well, who are you to question that? Right? Problem is, you know your body better than anybody. They don't know exactly how you feel or exactly what the symptoms are. They only know what their charts tell them and how you describe it. But you're the expert on you. The same thing happens with finance, doesn't it? Because financial management can be really intimidating. And almost all advisors make it intimidating, like doctors, right? We talk about things that most people don't know about or have ever studied. Standard deviation and correlation and asset allocation and convexity and yield curves and alpha and info ratio and on and on and on. Charts and statistics that are, well, like looking at an x-ray if you're a layman. It can get really intimidating. So we tend to delegate when we are looking for an advisor. We tend to give them all our info, let them go do all their analysis, come back and tell us what we should do. And we trust that, well, they are the experts. They must know. And in some ways, if we do that to too far of an extent, we abdicate control and responsibility. And that can lead to poor solutions. So whether it's in the healthcare field, or I think especially in financial management, in retirement management, and we've talked about this before in retirement management, acknowledging that nobody has ever done it for baby boomers. Nobody has it figured out because we've never had to deal with people retiring early, having 30 plus years of potential retirement with little or no pension, being much more active, on and on and on. Nobody's ever had to do that. It's not like we have generations of data of how this actually works. And the more that I do this and work and talk with people in the advice community, really serious thinkers, we're all just trying to muddle through and figure this out. And I'm not saying that to make you worried, but I'm just acknowledging the reality of the situation when it comes to modern retirement. So I think if you're going to use an advisor, and I think this is true probably for medical too, is rather than delegation of hiring somebody to delegate the responsibility, I think the better way to do it is to collaborate with a financial advisor to together manage change so we can land this plane on the aircraft carrier and really rock retirement. So let's talk about delegation versus collaboration. Well, delegation is I'm going to find an expert and I'm going to hand over responsibility and control and let them manage it and tell me what I need to do. I'm going to delegate this to them. I like the idea of collaboration. And in our practice, especially from being an Agile, it's really every client is an ongoing project, and it's a project management exercise using an Agile methodology. And what does that mean? Well, that means the client comes alongside, and rather than hand over all the information and let the advisor come up with a solution and present it and then say yay or nay, is that they work together. And why is that? Because one, you are the expert in you, and you and your wife know the entire history of what your needs are, what your wants are, what your fears are. And you're going to be more tuned into your changing priorities as your life unfolds. So why should you not be really involved in the whole conversation? Whereas the advisor, if they focus on retirement, they should have the wisdom of having walked a journey very similar to the one that you're on with a lot of people. So the issues that you're dealing with as you enter this season of life, they've dealt with different versions of it over and over and over again. And hopefully, if they're intentional, they've learned and they've gained wisdom through those multitude of journeys. So they're the expert in the journey, but you're the expert in you. And together you bring very different perspectives, very different skill sets that can help you together be more creative to come to better solutions. Because this is about change management, project management, more than it is about figuring it out. That's how I think you can have a healthy relationship with a professional if you choose to do so. And if you don't, you can do this for yourself and still think of it from this perspective. So don't delegate, collaborate. Now let's go to practical planning and figure out, how do we keep filling these buckets that we talked about setting up last week? So today in the practical planning segment, I want to continue our conversation about building this cash reserve system or bucket system. If you recall, we talked about creating a payroll reserve funded with 2 years of needs and 1 year of want, and how to get back into a rhythm in terms of creating your paycheck so you can manage cash flow. Now, what happens as life unfolds and you start to drain these cash reserves that you've created? We're going to have to manage this change and fill up the buckets. So I want to talk about how you might do that today and give you some tips to help you manage this change successfully. So I think the first thing you need to do as you set this up is to make sure that you have the wind at your back. So if you've run or you've cycled before, you know, if you're riding into the wind, it can be really hard. But if you're riding with the wind at your back, it sort of helps push you along a little bit. And there's some real basic things you can do in setting up this paycheck system or bucket system to help have the wind at your back. So when I say you should have 2 years of cash reserves, doesn't mean it has to be sitting there doing nothing. You can have those in higher yielding money market accounts online. Just over the last year ago, it feels like we're in heaven having, potential for 2.5% return on money markets or savings accounts. And you can get those right now anyway, fairly easily in online banks. Likely you're not going to get that at normal brick and mortar banks or credit unions. So it will take a little bit of work for you, and it may take a little bit of adjustment on your part if you've not used an online bank before, but that's picking up some nickels and dimes that can help from having the wind at your back from a cash flow perspective. So as an example, if you need $100,000 a year and you want to have 2 years of reserve, and that's $200,000, well, if you keep that at a local bank and you earn basically 0%, and you move that to, let's say, a online bank or credit union or whatever that's earning 2%, you're going to pick up roughly $4,000 per year in interest that you otherwise wouldn't have at the brick and mortar bank earning nothing. That's what I'm talking about when we're talking about having the wind at your back. So definitely don't let it sit there and do nothing. And next, above that, having 2 years cash reserve doesn't mean it has to be 100% cash. That second year, well, it's a year away. So you could look at CDs, you could look at very short-term, very high-quality bonds that mature So when it comes up, you can have the money available, but it might get you a little bit more yield, a little bit more interest income, and it all goes to helping. So if you go from just simple, if you go from 0 to 2%, pick up $4,000 a year, that helps. So that's number one. Number two is you're going to have to identify what accounts you're going to source refilling these cash reserves. What tax categories do we have? We have after-tax investments. We have tax-deferred investments like IRAs or 401ks, and we have tax-free investments like Roth IRAs. If you're going to tap your after-tax investments first, one thing you can do is, by the allocation, have it designed to throw off more than normal income through what you own in your asset allocation policy. That could be more bonds. It could be, a leaning towards dividend paying equities, all sorts of things. Well, normally, probably throughout your investing career, you've reinvested everything, meaning that when your mutual fund or ETF or mutual fund basically, right, issued a dividend from its portfolio, you just use that dividend to buy more shares of the same mutual fund. It's a great way to do it as you're accumulating assets because you buy more and more shares, and it ends up really helping you in the long term, typically. Well, if you know that you're going to tap that account to help refill your buckets, turn off the dividend reinvestment. Let that money flow into the account. Now, with that concept of having the wind at your back, now you have at least some money flowing into the account that you could use when you're trying to refill your cash reserve bucket. So that's a very simple thing that you can do. For the accounts that you're not going to tap that are still, longer term, your upside portfolio, we'll get to that next week, you can still reinvest those because that's going to potentially help you longer term because they're longer term money. So those are a couple ways you can help put the wind at your back in terms of cash flow. So one thing we want to take into account, and we'll talk about it briefly here, but we're not going to dive in too deep because this is going to be a whole theme in a month in the future because it can be a big topic, is when you retire, the bad part is you lose your paycheck. But one upside of that is that you have a lot more control than you probably ever had in what tax bracket you will be in each year because you're not going to have income. So if you have after-tax assets, tax-deferred assets, and tax-free assets, you can choose and mix how you source filling these buckets as you have to do it. So a good example would be, let's assume that you're married and you filed jointly and you have $20,000 in pre-retirement income. You don't have a pension. You're not taking Social Security yet. And you have equal amounts in the three different tax categories in terms of investments. Well, if you're earning $20,000 a year, and I'm not going to get into deductions and things like that, but if you have realized income of $20,000 a year and you're married and filing jointly, well, you're going to be in the 12% tax bracket because taxable income from $19,051 to $77,400, anything within that range, you're paying 12% on. Every incremental dollar over $77,400, you're in the 22% tax bracket. That's a huge leap. And the way the tax brackets are structured, you have 10%, 12%, 22%, then 24%, and then 32%. So they don't go up in equal amounts. So if you have taxable income of $20,000, if you decide to source your buckets, the funding for your buckets from your after-tax assets, you're probably not going to have a lot of tax consequence there because you've already paid tax on that money. But you may have an opportunity to fill up that 12% tax bracket because you have a difference of about $57,000 from $20,000 to $77,000, where it's still only going to be taxed at 12%. So as you're refilling these buckets or filling them initially, you want to do a little bit of planning here to either intentionally take money from tax deferred assets up to the top end of that 12% tax bracket. So you're only paying a 12% tax on that taxable income rather than say 22 or higher later on. That could over time help you save potentially a substantial amount in taxes on all your tax deferred assets. Because when you turn 70 and a half, you're not going to have any choice. They're going to tell you how much you need to take out, and your tax bracket will be whatever it is. And people have found themselves in that situation right now because they didn't do some pre-planning on filling the tax bracket bucket. In this situation, you could either take money out of your tax deferred assets in order to fund your buckets, or you could still use your after-tax assets, but you could also convert a portion of your tax deferred assets in order to fill up that 12% bucket in this example and, convert it to a Roth. Then you don't have to do RMDs on the Roth, and now that's tax-free forever. That's one overlay that you may want to put on your brackets. And this may be a little bit more advanced. I just want to make sure I mention it and acknowledge it. But for now, I think we're just really trying to get the bones of this bucket system put in place. But I wanted to make sure I mentioned that. So we talked about having the wind at your back. The next thing is, okay, as life unfolds, when should you refill these buckets? Right? Because the money is going to drain as you're paying your paycheck out of that reserve account. I like to revisit it twice a year to adjust and to see if there are going to be changes to what your cash flow needs are going to be. Because a lot of times we're setting these type of systems up right before or early in retirement. And we're making decisions about how you're going to live in retirement when you've never done it in your life, right? Because it's new. So we're just guessing. So as you get into retirement, you're going to find your own rhythm and gradually get your sea legs. So it's good to identify changes in what those needs, wants, and wishes are so we can fine tune those buckets as we gain more information and as you figure out this whole new life in retirement. So I like to revisit that at least twice a year and talk about unexpected expenses, things that you've discovered, maybe things that you thought you needed that you don't need, so we can fine tune those buckets. So I would revisit that twice a year. And then when you have really good markets, you have a huge run up, you could strategically decide to refill the buckets early to take some, cream off the top during good times. Because when there are really bad times, there are other things that you can do to help mitigate some of that. So 2 times a year I would start with, and then as you find your rhythm, you can do each year and then decide how much you want to refill the buckets. In good markets, you may fill them early, but what happens when they're bad markets? How do you refill your buckets when the world is falling apart? And this is what I'm talking about when we talk about change management, right? All of this. And I had to go through this using this system in 2008 or so. So what do you do when markets are bad or choppy and you're revisiting your cash flow buckets? Well, one is you want to self-rescue as much as possible or mitigate the damage. What do I mean by that? Well, there's a reason that we count the cost of retirement as needs, wants, and wishes. Another way to say that is non-discretionary spending, discretionary spending. So when storms have already rolled in and you're trying to make your adjustments as you're heading towards the aircraft carrier, one thing you can do is batten down the hatches and slow down the discretionary spending, which will extend the length of time that you have cash reserves for. And we did this through the 2008 debacle of maybe travel goes from international to national, internal. Maybe travel goes away. Maybe it's a road trip and not business class international. You can slow down the discretionary spending, which is a natural thing that we probably have done for years in life as we've had curveballs thrown at us. But that can do a lot to mitigate the damage. We can also slow down or decrease how often or how much we refill the buckets in order to give markets time to calm down, to go through whatever cycle that they're going through. So by battening down the hatches, slowing your spending a little bit, and slowing down the refilling of the buckets when you revisit it twice a year, both of those can help mitigate a lot of the damage and help get you safely through that storm when markets are pretty bad. Now, then the question becomes, and I mentioned this before, is 2 years enough? Well, this is how I've operated for a number of years. I'm adjusting that. And that's what we're going to talk about next week on the show, is how we can build a little bit more clarity on managing this so we can feel a little safer that we have more time to react to major changes coming. By the way, if you are signed up for 6-Shot Saturday, I'm going to send out a very good piece by Thornburg explaining this cash flow bucket system. So you'll get that in 6-Shot Saturday. If you're not signed up for 6-Shot Saturday, you can go to rogerwhitney.com. Towards the bottom, you can enter your name and email, and then you'll get 6 quick tips every Saturday morning on how to rock retirement. With that, let's go get happy.
Welcome to the Happy Lab, where we noodle on how to live a happier life.
So, Nicole, you did something really cool on my calendar over the last month. Why don't you describe?
I did? What did I do?
Well, what did you do?
I blocked off time for you to do things. That doesn't really seem...
All of a sudden, these things pop up on my calendar because Nicole manages me, which is obvious. All of a sudden, I see on my calendar, like, time blocks. Dude's got to eat.
Be awesome. That was one.
That was an awesome one. All these little time blocks, because I use online calendars and they can get overwhelming, that are popping up on my calendar, and they're hilarious. And my understanding is the intent was to try to give me some breathing time, right?
Well, your calendar was getting so full of meetings. I got worried that, you would have had to not sleep in order to do all the action items for the meeting. So that just didn't seem like a very good setup.
So my question is, did you do the same thing for yourself?
No, I didn't. And I should. I really should.
You should, right? Self-care.
I have started adding little to-do lists that are things that I want to do during my day. That's my, calendar blocking equivalent. Like if I want to do something nice for myself, I actually add it to the to-do list. Otherwise, it won't get done.
Well, it's hard when you have 3 kids running around the house and, all the obligations. I count your husband as a kid, by the way.
Oh, I was like, do I have another kid? I don't know. That's bad.
Well, it's easy to think about everybody else, right? And not protect yourself.
Yes, exactly.
And I learned that in rafting. I've done a lot of rafting sort of around the world, which is not by intent. It just sort of happened out that way. And when you're getting ready to go into, you're driving to where they're going to put the boat in and you have your guide, he gives this speech about, okay, if you fall out in the water and you're sitting there and you're in the rapids, don't look for us to rescue you. You have to rescue yourself.
I was like, how is this related?
Because we're busy dealing with the rapids. We may throw you a rope or try, but I got to take care of the boat. It's your responsibility to rescue yourself. And so I'm glad you're putting these on your calendar.
Me too.
But you better.
So does that mean I'm off the hook for rescuing you and I don't have to block off your calendar anymore?
No, I really appreciate that, by the way.
Okay. I'll keep doing it.
But definitely do that for yourself. And you out there, make sure you do it for yourself, because no doubt, even if you're retired, things get busy. And especially if you're thinking about everyone else and you want to love on everybody else, you can't do that if you don't love on yourself first. True that.
Yes.
All right, let's go set a smart sprint.
On your marks, get set.
In the next 7 days, let's set a little baby step to take some intentional action to create a great life. Now, you can choose to take some action on some of this bucket filling strategy stuff we're talking about, but I would suggest that you do what we just talked about and schedule some time on your calendar for next week where it's only about you. Hey, Nicole, it's almost springtime.
Yay. I'm so ready.
And we are in Texas. I feel for the people in the Northeast.
Oh, yes.
They
have like 2 months left.
Yeah, they may listen to these episodes after they unfreeze. They might be in actual hibernation right now. It's been so cold this winter.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what else spring brings? Open enrollment for the Rock Retirement Club.
Ooh, I'm excited.
Yes. So we have, 160-ish people in the club, and we've been sharing some tidbits on the show. And this is the kind of club where there's a lot of education, a lot of resources, but a lot of fellowship with people that are like-minded in the similar stage of life. And the theme of the club is walk with the wise and become wise. And I think we're doing pretty good at accomplishing that. And we would love to have you join us in the spring if it's something that you think fits your life. So you can go to rockretirementclub.com and get on the wait list, and then we'll make sure you're updated on orientation meetings so you can learn more about it. Until then, stay warm and take care of yourself, all right?
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of Retirement Answer Man. Be sure to visit rogerwhitney.com/answers to access the Retirement Answer Library with over 30 checklists to help you make the most of the only life you have. Remember, you have more power than you realize to create an amazing life starting today with Retirement Answer Man. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Have a wonderful day.